So I'm just back from seeing Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and I just wanted to make a video giving my thoughts on it. I'm going to be a little brief with this. This is my nutter. Here's the gist video. I'm going to kind of summarize it a bit first, and then a little bit I'm going to get into spoilers, and I'll have a timestamp for when that happens. Multiverse of Madness is the newest Marvel entry in the multiverse storyline that they're doing. Directed by Sam Raimi of Evil Dead fame and of Spider-Man trilogy fame. And honestly, for this type of movie, I think he's a really great pick to direct this movie for the parts that he clearly did direct. Now, that is to say that his style is all over this movie, but you can clearly see it in a number of scenes, and when it's not there, it is kind of lacking. But I am really glad that they got Sam Raimi into this. I was just goggling at all the Raimi-isms that he managed to insert into this. It felt refreshing, and it's good to see that while he hasn't made anything in quite some time, that his style never really goes anywhere. He still has the frantic editing of Evil Dead and even the demon POV shots at times. You get some of that in this movie, and it's really great to see. Even towards the end, there's some kind of campy dialogue that it's more forgiving, because I feel like that's what Sam would have wanted in this movie. And along with that, the whole last 30 minutes of this movie is basically kind of an Evil Dead storyline with a lot of MCU characters, which I really appreciated a lot. However, that is to say that this movie doesn't have its problems, because it absolutely does. Underwhelming after a lot of the hype that this movie got. I want to preface, I didn't go into this with any knowledge of what could or could be in this movie. I had my speculation, sure, but I didn't actually know what was happening. Apparently there was leaks. I somehow managed to avoid them this time, except for the Spider-Man ones, which was impossible to ignore. No one could have ignored those ones. So I didn't go into this expecting any of the surprises. Now, while there isn't as many as there was in Spider-Man, there is a few, which I'll get to in the spoiler segment. But I want to say, I'm not one of these people who thinks this movie is average because it's not chock full of cameos. It's exactly what I wanted. I didn't want this movie to be fan service central. I wanted to be an actual cohesive story. And was it? Well, the story itself is very tacked on. It's very loose in a lot of places. It's almost basically a MacGuffin storyline about going through multiverses, which is the problem I had with one of the characters in the movie, the character of America Chavez. I'm just going to call it Chavez because the amount of times they called it America in this movie kind of made it feel like they were doing some easy writing and they were trying to get some messages in there. I don't know if it was completely intentional, but it might have been. The Chavez character was probably one of the worst aspects of the movie because she didn't feel like a character at all. The characters and the writers treated her as an object in a way. Not in a way of objectifying women, but more as a MacGuffin. They just treated her as if we need this character to go from point A to point B, and I just couldn't get invested in her storyline, and the storyline is based completely around her. I couldn't really care for the character because they just pushed all of this onto her, and it just felt like complete nothing. She was basically this movie's equivalent of Mary Jane Watson in the Sam Raimi trilogy, because all she did was get into danger and scream half the time. She was either just screaming, and when she wasn't screaming, she was just spewing out exposition. She didn't feel like a real character, so I just couldn't get invested in what was happening to her. By the end of the movie, I almost wanted her powers to get taken so we wouldn't have to see the character again. But that's just me. I think a lot of people especially are kind of over-exaggerating parts of this movie. They're saying it's extremely brutal and the horror elements are extremely terrifying and like really scary. Now, the horror elements, when they're there, are done really well. When they're in the creepy kind of, ooh, that kind of gets under your skin kind of horror. Not when it's a jump scare every 5 minutes. I hate jump scares. I think they're the lowest form of horror. They never get me. They are extremely cheap and tacky, and this movie had one too many of them. There was way too many. It just didn't feel right. It just didn't feel like it belonged in this kind of movie. He could have had a lot more creepy imagery, and there is a good law Like, there's one scene where Wanda is coming out of this mirror thing. I think it was a symbol or something like that. And she's coming out of it, and her body is, like, twisting and converting like a contortionist. It was very similar to The Ring in that regard, and it was really cool to see that, rather than her face popping up and a loud boom sound happening. If it was less of that, I think the horror could have been done really well, but obvious MCU fans, they'll just, they see the slightest thing that is different from the normal MCU form, they'll go ape shit about it. I can't really talk about more aspects about the movie without getting into some of the spoilers, so here it is. Here is your warning. It is on the screen right now. If you don't see it, you're blind, you're dumb. Get off the video. If you haven't seen the movie yet, there are spoilers happening right now. As you can see, they're coming right now. You gone? Cool. So, the cameos in this movie were definitely interesting to see. We already knew about Professor X because of the trailers, but what got me more than actually seeing him was the fact that my boy Danny Elfman played the goddamn 90s X-Men theme with his entrance, and it was glorious. It was redone, it was a little orchestral version, and it was so cool to hear it in this. And then I guess the biggest thing about this movie was the big cameo with John Krasinski as Mr. Fantastic, giving the fans exactly what they wanted. Absolute just pandering to them. It was great. As soon as I seen these characters coming, I should have expected that they were gonna just kill them off immediately, because they're allowed to do that, because it's the whole multiverse thing. They kill them in this universe, they can still bring them back in another one, because they finally confirmed, I guess, for the comic fans to jerk themselves off, they mentioned that the MCU that's been taking place for ages is regarded as 616, so that's pretty cool for them to have. But anyway, they basically kill off the Illuminati in this, just very quickly. Like, someone on the Marvel team seeing Suicide Squad and was like, oh, that's pretty funny and a dope concept. It was very unexpected. Let's put that in our Doctor Strange movie for no reason other than just debate fanboys. It's a little bit scummy of them, and I mean, honestly, it's not as great as the whole Spider-Man thing was. It was really cool, and I was surprised, sure, but when I slept on it a little bit more, I just realized, it's mostly just fan pandering. And while in Spider-Man No Way Home it was a little bit more acceptable, this one feels a little bit tacked on. But it is good that the whole movie wasn't completely fan service central. So while I did like this movie, it definitely has its problems. The CGI in the movie was decent at parts, but there was a lot of points where it was really distracting, and it was really bad. I think there was probably lighting problems on screen, because half the time they're acting against a green screen anyway, especially on Elizabeth Olsen. Like, there is lighting on her face that just makes her look like a completely different actress. It looks like a completely different person, which was really distracting at times. This film was a lot less humorous than other MCU entries. When the humor was there, it was very weak, but it wasn't as forced as any other MCU property. That's kind of all I got for this movie, honestly. I was really hyped for it when it came out, after Spider-Man. I was like, oh, this Doctor Strange, like, they can probably take this kind of mid character and make something cool out of it. Imagine the possibilities they could do. And I think that's the problem of this movie. They had such an opening to do some really cool things with this movie, but they didn't. They really held back on it, and while I'm partially grateful for it, they still could have done a little bit more with it. You have this whole multiverse concept, and you don't really do anything interesting with the other universes that they go to. They go to at least 2 or 3, and, they're fine, but they're not explicitly interesting. I guess the movie is worth watching. I don't know if I'd watch it again for a while anyway. It's mostly just great to see for the Sam Raimi cinematography and the horror elements he incorporated into it when it wasn't a bunch of jump scares, because the Marvel execs obviously was like, oh, people nowadays don't like, creepy horror from, when Sam Raimi was making Evil Dead. Let's just throw in a bunch of jump scares. That'll sell them on it. They'll call it horror that way, if there's more jump scares in this than any other MCU property. But yeah, the movie is alright. You can go see it. I guess it's watchable. I mean, it's going to probably be important for the MCU timeline. I think after Thor, anyway, I don't know really where the MCU is going. It's kind of, I'm feeling a big fatigue. Even though Moon Knight, I just finished that, like, yesterday, and it was pretty good. It was really good, actually. It was one of the best MCU shows that they've made, but even that felt very held back by the family-friendly aspects of it. Apparently, there's rumors that Sam Raimi had complete creative control of this movie. I don't believe that for a second. I feel like he definitely directed scenes, but the overlords of Marvel were pulling the strings on it. It's alright. You can go see it if you like. I don't know. I'm a little disappointed. Sorry if I don't sound too enthusiastic about it, but it's really just an okay Marvel movie with a lot of really cool shit if you're a Sam Raimi fan. That's the gist of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Please subscribe for more reviews. That will be a lot better than this. I do have a video coming up. It's gonna be a really good one. Goodbye.